Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about romantasy, which is a new term that I learned, and I will get into defining it in a second, but I want to give you some context. So, I have a colleague, a work colleague, who on the side writes romance novels under, I believe, a pseudonym, I'm not sure. And I was really curious when I found this out because I was asking them, like, why romance novels? And what they told me was it is one of the best selling genres of books, way outpacing other fiction genres like science fiction, fantasy, detective, novels, and a lot of nonfiction as well. It's just a very big genre, and it apparently sells continuously. It doesn't have peaks for like around Christmas or summer. Like I kind of thought that they were books that people kind of read in the summer. Nope, they apparently sell really well all the time, and they're fairly easy to write. So that, of course, made me think of the rise of romanceable companions in RPGs, which I'm on record as saying that's something I really don't like. But as long as the game lets me ignore it, I'm fine. And this then, because I was searching all this, a video came up on my feed from someone who is a British bookseller. I guess he owns a shop. And he was talking about how modern science fiction is turning into romantasy, which is a combination of romance and fantasy. And what he meant by that is this idea of romance as a central tenet to these science fiction books have become unavoidable. It's wrapped up in the main story. It's not like a side thing. And science fiction has become more fantasy in the sense of there's a lot of books that are called science fiction, but it contains ideas that aren't a reasonable extrapolation of where science will go, and they don't even bother explaining it. It's just fantasy. It's like magic wrapped up to make it look like science fiction. Now, I understand a lot of people are like, oh, I don't like this. Turns out sci-fi and fantasy have started being merged for a long time. When I go on my Kindle, there isn't a science fiction category and a fantasy category. It's sci-fi fantasy. And this isn't the first time science fiction has changed. I started reading sci-fi in the 70s, and something I noticed happen in the 80s was someone would write a book and be really popular, so then they'd write a sequel, and then another sequel. And then that would turn into a quintology or a decology. And that used to be a rare thing, and now it's a common thing. As soon as a book is popular, expect it to be turned into a trilogy or a quintology or a series. That's just the way everything's rolling. It's like, I don't know if it's the author or the publisher, but they're like, well, this is money. We got to make money. Let's do this. The problem with all these things is there are some people who really get repulsed by that. And by repulsed, I mean if they pick up a book and they find out it's part of a series, they may not even read the series. Or they're at very minimum wait for the series to be done because they don't want to jump into something that doesn't conclude. Similarly, with romantasy, I know some people just won't read it. It's like if the main crux of a book is someone's relationship to someone else and all the sci-fi stuff's in the background. By the way, it's one of the reasons I stopped watching Walking Dead. Some point, I forget what season it was, I realized that I watched an entire episode that had nothing to do with zombies. I think the zombies were just shown off in the background somewhere. But it was all about people and the relationships and them talking to each other. And I'm like, oh my God, it's like a really, really awful soap opera. So I just stopped watching it. That's when I realized that's what romantasy is to me. It repulses me. And if it becomes integral to the series in a way that it's not just some side thing, that there are whole story arcs and chapters that you can't avoid and it's integral, then I don't like it. I've talked about romanceable game companions, and I'm fine with them if you can still have the companion and just ignore the romance part. Like they bring it up once, you're like not interested, and they stop bringing it up. But if it's integral to everything they say and do, I'm like, ugh, I don't like this. And I've tried to explain it to some of my friends and get away from game and book terms. So imagine a buffet, a smorgasbord is what we used to call it. So imagine a buffet where there's a whole bunch of different food, but you discover that all the food contains something that you either can't eat, like literally you're allergic to, or you just don't like. Like maybe everything on the buffet table has meat in it, even the desserts. Or maybe everything has gluten. Or maybe everything has carbs. Something that you can't eat, but everything in the buffet's got it. So it's not like you can go to this buffet with your friends and like, well, I'll eat these 4 or 5 things and I can't eat these. No, everything has that thing. This is what I'm seeing happening in books and games. Some of these things that are used to be optional or many games didn't even have them are now integral to the game and cannot be avoided. Now, I've known about this for a long time, and when I added things that I knew were specific to people's tastes, like humor that broke the fourth wall or a companion that you could romance, we had that in Temple, it was easily avoidable. And when people complained that there was a gay romance in Temple of Elemental Evil, I reminded them that you had to start this side quest with the pirates, which was completely optional, say certain things to the pirate and the cabin boy, which were completely optional. You and then you had to reach it, and then you had to go, yeah, let's do this. It was not something that just fell on your head, and it was certainly not something that wasn't optional. Now, there are some exceptions in my games. For Outer Worlds, we decided the humor was front and center. It was integral to everything. It was in how people talked. It was in the storyline. It was in the lore text. So yes, it was unavoidable. And then there were people who didn't like the game because of it. There are some things that you have to decide thematically, whether it's an art style, a dialogue style, what kind of storylines you have. And I get that there are people who avoid things. Romantasy is one of the things for me that I avoid. And I'm talking romantasy because it's that combination of unavoidable romance and science fiction that doesn't even try to explain or pretend that it's an extension of modern science. So it just becomes fantasy. It becomes magic. They might have just said a wizard did it. And what's interesting in me watching some of these videos, because once I watched that British bookseller, I got fed a lot more videos about this, is apparently the rise of romantasy is reducing book sales. And the way they explained it was, so a decade or two before, science fiction and fantasy got combined. In a lot of stores, they're in the same location. So you will find space opera right next to Harry Potter. And booksellers are trying to support those genres. But the way it was explained was a bestseller in a genre helps support all the genre. So if a really popular book comes out, say a popular young adult fantasy novel comes out, this paves the way for a lot more young adult fantasy novels. Smaller titles that won't sell as well, but because a lot of people got attracted by that big seller, they spend a little more money in that genre, and those smaller titles can be supported as well. The problem this bookseller was saying is that romantasy showing up in big titles was driving those people who didn't like it out of the genre altogether. They were looking for other things. And if they did buy that bestseller and didn't like it, they were unlikely to buy these smaller titles. So this has led to a weird, like, science fiction is not only selling less, but the smaller titles are selling disproportionately less than the bigger titles. And his theory was that was why. And I listened to this and I'm like, oh no, this is what's happening to video games. And basically things are being put in integral to the game that a chunk of people don't like, and then it drives them away from the genre altogether. And it's not just romantasy. For some people it's politics. For some people it's mention of social issues. It can be anything. But the problem isn't that it's there, it's that it's integral and you can't avoid it. Because my games have been full of things like that. Fallout is full of social commentary. It's full of it. You can't avoid it. People who say that Fallout has recently gone woke apparently didn't play Fallout 1 or 2 because they're full of commentary, the same commentary they're complaining are in the new games. But what's interesting about them is it's completely not integral to the game. If you don't talk to people very much, if you just talk to them, get a quest, and then you do the quest and you're done, you won't notice a lot of these things. If you skip reading books and computer messages, you won't get a lot of these things. The all my games are playable without talking to anyone at all. I told you there's a producer I work with. He just shoots everybody on site. He doesn't talk to anybody, and he certainly doesn't bother reading a lot of computer messages. So those themes don't exist in his playthrough of the game. The problem is a lot of games are coming out where these themes are now integral. You literally cannot play the game, and you certainly can't enjoy it unless you interact with those themes. And I think this is people thinking how clever they are of getting these themes delivered to people through a video game, through a fantasy game, through a science fiction game. But really what seems to be happening is video games, like books, are now being splintered into different markets that are not being well served. And people are frustrated with games, even if they don't quite know why. And they're not exactly sure what the fix is. Which to me, watching these videos, seems obvious, which is if you're narrative designers, it's primarily narrative designers, if they wish to deliver these messages, whatever they are, just make sure they're avoidable. It's the same thing I have about romanceable characters. Fill your game with romanceable characters. I don't care unless I cannot proceed through your main story arc without having to take on a romanced companion. If they hit on me and I'm like, no thanks, and then they stop, I'm fine. But if I'm forced to do that, like the only way you can have a companion, or the only way the companion can rise in power to be useful, is if you romance them, I'm tapping out. So I think that would help our industry avoid what's happening in books, which is stop making certain themes integral to the playing and enjoying of your game. Put them in the game, put them on the side, let people dig for them. You can still have them, but don't make them integral. Otherwise, I think we're going to go the route of romantasy. Anyway, I hope you like that.